Hello, everybody. Hope everyone's having a fantastic day. Today is a good one on Linchpin there, like Cindy with the heavy deadlift, so hope that is enjoyable later on. The topic today is a question that got sent my way that I think is really cool and applicable to a lot of people, so hopefully it helps. I'll give you my 2 cents on it, and then if you've got a different opinion or different perspective, of course, feel free to leave that in the comments. It's always cool to hear what everybody else thinks instead of me just running my mouth all the time. So here's the question. This was posted a bit ago from Ann S. The question is, and this was back when, this is a little bit ago, so an upcoming workout was heavy overhead squats. Let's just say it was a 7x1, dedicated heavy day, overhead squats. And Ann says, I'm looking forward on the workout calendar and I see that Saturday is a heavy day, overhead squats. I'm pretty new to overhead squats, so anything I could do would be considered heavy. So should I work on front squats and load up the bar to make it actually heavy for my body, the intended stimulus, or should I do the overhead squats, which would not be that heavy, but it would be the correct movement? So, cool question. I think a lot of people find themselves in that situation. And like so many things, it's not a very simple answer A or answer B. There's a little bit of context and nuance that hopefully, after we have the discussion, will help people make the best decision for them. So, okay, let's say it was a 7x1 overhead squat. Ann's new to overhead squats, isn't really going to be able to go heavy, so it's not really going to be a heavy day, so to speak. So what should she do? Stick with it and go really light, or swap it out and do heavy front squats or something like that and get a heavy below parallel day in. So, can't go heavy with the overhead squat anyway. So there could be several reasons for this, right? Let's say it's a lack of confidence in the movement. Okay, well, a lack of confidence in the movement is not going to be solved with front squats or back squats, right? So that would lend me to say practice and a technique day will most likely be your friend. What if it's not lack of confidence? It's, it is technique. It's some other sort of just mechanics of the movement sort of a thing. No, that's not going to be solved with front squats either. It's going to be more time under the bar doing the overhead squat even at a light loading to work on positioning. So again, the answer goes back to overhead squats. What if somebody can't get into a good, safe position for the overhead squat? That's the problem. They're just wobbly. You're like, I don't know if I'd have that bar overhead if I were you. Well, then the question becomes, why can't you get into that position? And an oversimplification might be, is it something which is temporary in nature, or is it something which is permanent in nature? Temporary in nature would just be, you're a little tight, as most of us are, in your ankles, in your hips, in your shoulders, wherever, and that's not going to be improved, let's say, by back squatting if it was your shoulders, right? So again, spending more time in that position, doing some flexibility work, some stretching may help get you towards being able to do that overhead squat at a respectable loading. So again, that's stretching and time in the position with a loading that makes sense, even if it's just an empty bar. If you can't get into that position because it's something more on the permanent side of the house, well, now we're maybe having a different discussion. Did you have some sort of surgery? You've got plates and screws somewhere. You've got some sort of mechanical thing going on that is not going to be remedied with a lacrosse ball, some bands, whatever it happens to be. Like, it is what it is. If that's the case, and hopefully that is not as frequent of a hindrance for people as something temporary, right? Most people, I think, fall into the temporary camp. But if you fall into the permanent camp that, look, my overhead position, because of something that happened to me in the past, this is how it looks, and it's pretty much not going to improve, well, now we're in an actual place where I would say, yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense for you to overhead squat. Let's contemplate doing something else for you if you're in the permanent route. Now, Anne's saying that she's new to the movement and didn't lead us down any path of significant hindrance due to can't extend her arm or can't get into the position, just new to the movement, unfamiliar, lack of confidence potentially, and because of that there's not going to be a lot of loading on the bar. And so even though it's intended to be a heavy day, it's not really going to be that heavy. So if we're being fair in our assessment of her situation, what would the right course of action be? Well, if somebody is a new athlete or a beginning athlete, and I think a lot of us have been in this situation before, if you're a new athlete, new to CrossFit, new to strength and conditioning, new to moving your body again, even just a day working on technique is a day that will leave you tired and head to toe sore as if it was a demanding heavy day. And I remember having this experience as somebody who had been doing CrossFit like 5 to 7 years. And then I went to one of those Olympic lifting courses with Mike Bergner, and we spent basically all of day one with a PVC pipe in our hands. And I went to bed that night feeling like I'd been hit by a truck just from having a PVC pipe in my hand. And I was not a beginner athlete at that time. But just working the positions and holding those positions elicited a significant response in my body. So, you've got a new athlete, okay, maybe there's not going to be a lot of loading on the bar, but there's a really good chance that if they just work the overhead squat that day with a loading that's appropriate for them and really fight for good positions, that they are going to feel like they got in a significant workout. Because trying to maintain good positions should be an active battle, not a passive battle, and it will leave you you won't be any mystery as to whether or not you worked hard in the gym that day. So that, I would say, is a quick answer for her there. Now, if we've got a more experienced athlete that maybe historically could get into an overhead squat position, but I don't know, maybe you're part of an adult football league and you tweaked your shoulder doing that, and now, because of that tweaked shoulder, you can't really get into a good overhead squat position, so the load's going to be light. What should you do on that overhead squat day? With that tweaked shoulder, should you just warm up, choose a weight that feels okay for your shoulder, work the overhead squat, even though it's not really going to be that demanding of a day for you? With somebody like that, I wouldn't have any issue at all with them doing some overhead squats at a loading that makes sense for that shoulder, and then afterwards, if they wanted to hit some heavy front squats or hit some heavy back squats just to kind of dose up the central nervous system, get under the bar a little bit, get the legs feeling juicy, I'd have no issue with that in any way, shape, or form. I think that would be totally fine. But I think that's a different situation than the new athlete, that everything's kind of challenging, and even just technique and position work for that new athlete is going to be one heck of a day in their garage working out. Now, that athlete that I just gave as an example there was the more experienced athlete, maybe, tweaked themselves playing a sport, and now they have to make a modification with their overhead squat. Well, what if you've got a more experienced athlete that, for whatever reason, their lack of ability to overhead squat isn't just from playing football with their buddies, it's actually something permanent. Like, they can do all kinds of other stuff, but the overhead squat is not really their friend. And I would almost lump myself into this category as well, which after, 17 years of doing CrossFit, or 16 years, however the heck long it's been, the overhead squat is still a really gnarly hit or miss position for me. It depends on the day, it depends on the week, and I've been, very vocal about this. It's nothing that CrossFit did. It's accidents from the military and motorcycle accidents that have done significant damage to my body, and the overhead for me it's really hit or miss. My overhead squat is never, ever, ever going to be anything to write home about. Period, end of story. A 135 overhead squat it's a heck of a loading for me, and I can't say with confidence that I would be able to do that loading every single day. It really just does depend how I feel that day and how I feel during the warm-up, and I know that other athletes fall into that camp as well. So for somebody like me, if it's a 7x1 overhead squat day, I'm not going to be able to put any sort of a decent amount of weight on the bar to really dose myself up. So traditionally, what I would do on like a 7 by overhead squat day, again, warm up, see how I feel, and what feels okay that day. Getting my ego the heck out of the way. Is it 95 pounds? Is it 115? Is it 135? It's probably not going to be more than 135. I'll let the cat out of the bag there. But what I have going on is while my one rep isn't that great, I might be able to have that 135 on the bar, let's say, and be able to do sets of 5 to 7 reps. And so what I might do, even though it's a heavy 7 by 1 overhead squat, is warm up to whatever feels appropriate for me, and then do multiple sets of 5 to 7 reps, just to get in some good positioning, some good loading or whatnot. And then if that loading was enough that day to feel like I had a good old hit to the central nervous system, I'm totally okay with walking out of the gym. 7 sets of 7 at 135, that's going to be just fine for me. But if that doesn't happen, it's a day that 135 isn't feeling good, and maybe only 115 is, and maybe sets of 7 aren't feeling great. It's just sets of 4. And so at the end of all that squatting, yeah, I worked on my positioning, so to speak, with some loading, which is very beneficial, but I didn't really get in a quote-unquote heavy day. I would be okay with doing a little something else just to get in some good below parallel strength. So I don't think there's any one simple answer. I think you need to take all those factors into play, ask why it is that you can or cannot get into a good position with the overhead squat. What's the limiting factor? Where are you on your athletic journey and your fitness journey? And then just technique work might be just fine, or technique work with a little bit of extra might be the right call for you. And, was it yesterday? What was yesterday? I'm blanking out on what yesterday's workout was. I can't remember for the life of me. I feel like I was on the bike, though. Oh, it was running and GHD sit-ups and handstand walks and things like that, and I had to swap out the handstand walks. But I regularly, as part of my warm-up, we program the Bergner warm-up regularly because it's fantastic head-to-toe warm-up, even if you're not snatching that day. But for me, but each athlete's a little bit different, so it's good to know yourself. I will try to work up to just an empty barbell overhead squat in my warm-up. I don't care what we're doing that day, even if we're not going below parallel, a few times a week, because it is a really tough position for me. I'm kind of like the Tin Man. And so just keeping the rust off, doesn't matter that it's an empty barbell. If a few times a week, sometime during my warm-up, I did 5 to 10 overhead squats with an empty barbell and they didn't feel like total hot garbage, that's just good for me to keep my body moving, keep my joints as open as I possibly can, and just keep that repeatedly touching that movement. So I feel the overhead squat is beneficial even outside of what is classically thought of like it's a great receiving position, obviously, for the snatch. It's an amazing head-to-toe strength builder. There's a lot of coordination, accuracy, agility, and balance needed because it is such a technically demanding movement. You have to have your mind engaged with your body the whole time. It is punishing if you're out of position, so it really forces you to focus. There are fantastic things associated with the overhead squat and plenty of reasons to do the overhead squat, even though you really don't see them done in nature. But even outside of that, again, getting back just to me, an empty overhead squat for sets of 5 to 10, I almost feel like it's therapeutic. I almost feel like it's, it can be either rehabilitative or it can be prehab as well. Just keep that position going because this is also a Greg Glassman line that I'm going to butcher a little bit, but people always want to have like an assessment as to whether or not you're flexible enough or is your range of motion enough. And you can make a serious argument that if you can do a below parallel overhead squat and the bar is right where it should be and your torso is up and your midline's tight and your feet are nice and flat on the ground, you're good. I find it hard to believe that you're going to need more flexibility in darn near anything else that life's going to throw at you. So that's about it. So have a wonderful day. If you can overhead squat, overhead squat. If not, work some technique. If not, do a little bit of stretching. And if you have to totally swap it out because you've got some sort of just mechanical impingement going on, go ahead and swap it out. Life goes on, fitness will be achieved, and that's that. Have a wonderful day, and we'll talk later.